My sister called me 3 days before her celebration dinner and told me to come. She said it warmly, the way people talk when they want you to feel included without actually making space for you. I drove 40 minutes, wore the dress I had saved for something that mattered, walked through those restaurant doors with a card in my hand and something fragile and hopeful still living in my chest. There was no seat for me at the table. Not a forgotten chair, not a squeeze in at the end situation. My name was simply not there. My sister looked at me from her place at the center of the table, surrounded by people I had quietly funded, supported, and covered for across the last 4 years, and she smiled the way you smile at someone who showed up unexpectedly at a party they were never meant to attend. I stood there for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Then I sat down at the bar alone, ordered water, and waited, not because I was weak, because I was finally paying attention. And what happened in the next 30 minutes changed the entire direction of my life. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If you had spent years being the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who showed up every time and never asked for anything back, and then the people you carried looked right past you at the moment that should have meant something, would you have stayed at that bar or would you have walked out the door? Think about that while I tell you exactly what happened and exactly what I did about it. My name is Nadia. I am 31 years old. I work as a freelance bookkeeper, which means I spend my days making sure other people's numbers are honest, their records are clean, and their finances make sense. I am good at it. I am good at seeing what is actually there versus what someone wants you to believe is there. That skill, that quiet ability to look past the surface and find the real picture underneath, turned out to be the most important thing I had, not just for my clients. For my own life, because for a long time I had been looking at my family the way a person looks at a painting they love and do not want to question. I saw what I hoped was there. I chose not to look too closely at the brushstrokes. That changed the night of my sister Priya's celebration dinner. Priya is 28. She is 3 years younger than me, and she has always been the one people call the bright one, the beautiful one, the one with personality. I say this without bitterness because I actually believe it. Priya does have personality. She is funny and loud and charming in rooms full of people, and she has always known how to make a moment feel like it belongs to her. I am not those things. I am the one who reads the fine print. I am the one who notices when the fridge is empty before anyone else does and quietly fills it. I am the one who sat at the hospital for 14 hours when our father had his procedure 2 years ago while Priya sent a voice note saying she was stuck in traffic and never showed up at all. I am the one who covered Priya's rent for 7 months when she quit her job at the hotel to chase what she called her vision. Her vision at the time was to become a lifestyle content creator. She bought equipment, rented studio time, created an account, posted 11 videos over 4 months, and then quietly stopped talking about it. 7 months of rent. I never asked for a single dollar back. Our mother, Diane, is 61. She is the emotional architect of our family, which is a polite way of saying she decides how every situation is interpreted, who gets credit, who gets sympathy, and who gets quietly handed the responsibility for making everything work. Diane loves Priya in the open, loud, praising way that makes Priya feel seen and certain. She loves me in the useful way, the way you love a good appliance. She trusts that I will be there, that I will handle it, that I will not need much, and that I will not cause a scene. She is not a cruel woman, but she is a woman who learned very early that some people are easier to rely on than to celebrate, and she made her peace with that trade-off a long time ago. Then there is my Aunt Rosie, Diane's younger sister, who has lived with us in the extended sense my whole life, meaning she has always had access to our home, our food, our celebrations, and our crises on her own schedule. Rosie is the kind of woman who arrives at someone else's emergency with advice and leaves before the cleanup. She has opinions about everyone's choices and consequences about none. She treated Priya like a second daughter and treated me like a helpful neighbor who happened to share a last name. This is the world I grew up in, and for a long time I told myself it was simply the way families work. Not every family divides things evenly. Not every person gets the same kind of love. I told myself I was okay with being the dependable one because at least I was needed. N. Needed is a form of love, I thought. I held on to that idea longer than I should have. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of Priya's engagement. She had gotten engaged 5 weeks earlier to a man named Caleb who was kind and easygoing and seemed to genuinely love her, which I was happy about. The dinner was at a restaurant called Vera, which was the kind of place that required a reservation weeks in advance and where the menu did not have prices listed because the assumption was that if you needed to know the price, you probably should not be there. My mother had made the reservation. She had coordinated with Caleb's mother and aunt. She had arranged flowers for the table and a cake from a bakery she drove 40 minutes to visit in person. She had told me about most of this in a group chat that included me, Priya, Rosie, and two of Priya's close friends from her old job. 3 days before the dinner, my mother sent a message to the group, reminder, Vera on Saturday at 7, so excited to celebrate our girl, wear something nice. It was a warm message. I responded with a heart. I started thinking about what to wear. I drove to the dry cleaner to pick up a dress I had been meaning to collect for 2 weeks. It was a deep green dress with a simple neckline that I had bought for a client dinner the previous year and only worn once. I thought it looked right for the occasions. I did not think to ask if there was a seat reserved for me. That seemed like a strange question. I had been included in the group chat. My mother had not said anything privately to suggest the dinner was exclusive or that the head count was tight, and I was Priya's sister, her only sister. The idea that there might not be a seat for me at her engagement celebration did not enter my mind even once. I arrived at Vera at 6:55 on Saturday evening. The hostess guided me toward the private dining area in the back. I heard laughter before I saw anyone. The table was round, which surprised me because I had imagined a long table, and it was set beautifully, cream linens and small arrangements of white and peach flowers and little menus at every place. Priya was already there, seated between Caleb and his mother. My mother was across from her next to Rosie. Caleb's aunt was there. Priya's two friends from her old job were there. A woman I did not recognize who turned out to be Caleb's cousin was there. There were 8 people seated at the table. The table had 8 place settings. There was not a ninth chair. There was not a space where a ninth chair might have been or had been moved. There was simply no physical evidence that anyone had anticipated my arrival. I stood in the doorway of that private room for what felt much longer than it actually was. My mother looked up and saw me first. Her expression did not change the way it would if she had forgotten something and was now embarrassed. It changed the way it does when something slightly inconvenient has appeared that she needs to manage quickly and quietly. She said, "Oh, Nadia, you made it," and smiled, and then looked sideways at Rosie in the way people look at each other when they are managing a shared problem without words. Priya looked up next. She gave me the smile, the unexpected guest smile. She said, "Hey, you," as if I were a pleasant surprise and not her sister at her engagement dinner at a restaurant she had mentioned to me in a group chat 3 days earlier. I said hello. I looked around the table once more just to make sure I had not missed something. I had not missed anything. There was simply no place for me. I said something like, "Let me just find a spot," and I stepped back out toward the hostess and asked if there was any way to add a chair. The hostess was professional and calm and said she would see what she could do, but that the private room was at its maximum allowed capacity and the adjacent tables were all reserved for other parties. I thanked her. I walked back to the entrance area. I sat down at the small bar near the front of the restaurant. I ordered a glass of water. I put my bag on the stool beside me and I sat with my green dress and my card in my purse and I tried to understand what was happening. Here is what I knew. My mother had planned this dinner with care. She had made a reservation. She had counted guests. She had arranged for 8 place settings, and she had done this with the knowledge that I existed and that I was, to anyone's reasonable understanding, a primary member of Priya's family. She had either not included me in the head count because it genuinely did not occur to her, or she had decided, consciously or just through the lazy math of assumption, that the dinner was for a certain group of people and that group did not include me. I did not know yet which it was. I would learn later that it was worse than either of those options. But at that bar in that moment, what I felt was not rage. It was something quieter and more damaging than rage. T was the recognition that I had been right all along to feel like I was outside something, and that the outside was not a phase I had not yet grown into. The outside was where they had always meant for me to be. 20 minutes passed. My mother came out from the private room. She found me at the bar and she came toward me with a look on her face that I can only describe as concerned but busy, which is the expression people use when they want credit for noticing something without having to actually fix it. She said, "Nadia, I am so sorry. I thought you knew the dinner was just immediate family and Caleb's side." I looked at her. I said, "Priya's 2 friends from her office are in there." She blinked. She said, "Well, they have known Priya for a long time." I said, "I am her sister." My mother looked at me with a kind of tired impatience, as if I were being difficult about something that was mostly solved. She said, "We will find a way to fit you in for dessert, okay?" And then she went back inside. Fit me in for dessert at my sister's engagement dinner after driving 40 minutes in the green dress. I sat with that for a moment, then I took my phone out of my bag. I did not text anyone in the family. I opened my banking app instead because that is what I do when I need to see clearly. I looked at my transaction history. 7 months of Priya's rent, $1,400 a month, $9,800 total sent to her landlord directly from my account. I looked at the $340 I had spent on the video equipment she had asked me to help with. I looked at the $212 I had sent to cover a gap in her phone bill because she said she was in between clients. I looked at the $85 I had quietly put into the gas card I kept in my car, specifically so that when Priya needed a ride somewhere and I had no cash, I could still help. I sat there at that bar and I looked at $11,437 that I had given to my sister across the last 4 years, most of it in amounts small enough that I had never made them feel like anything. I had made them feel like nothing on purpose, because that was what you did for family. The number sat there on my screen and it did not feel like anything dramatic. It just felt true, and truth, I have learned, is not always loud. I did not go back inside for dessert. I left a card at the front for the hostess to pass to Priya with a short note that said, "Congratulations, I am rooting for you both." I had to head out early. I drove home. I did not cry. I sat in my car in my driveway for a while and I thought about patterns, because that is what I do. I look for patterns. And the pattern I had been refusing to see for the last several years was now very, very clear. The pattern was not that my family was cruel. The pattern was that I had made myself so available, so reliable, and so quiet about what I gave that I had essentially trained everyone around me to treat my presence as optional and my support as automatic. I was the person who showed up and handled things. I was not the person who needed a seat. Those two things had slowly become my entire identity within my family's internal logic, and I had let it happen because I thought that being needed was the same as being valued. It is not. I understand that now. Being needed means you are useful. Being valued means you are irreplaceable for who you are, not just for what you do. My family needed me. They had never particularly valued me. And the difference between those two things had just cost me a seat at a table I had paid for in ways they could not even count. I went inside my apartment, I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, which is something I do when I need to think without noise. I wrote down what had happened, not dramatically, just factually the way I would write up a financial discrepancy for a client. I wrote down the events of the evening, the message in the group chat, the reservation, the 8 seats, the smile, the bar, the conversation with my mother. I wrote down the history of what I had contributed financially to Priya's life. I wrote down the moments over the years when I had been the one to handle something while the credit went somewhere else. I filled 3 pages. I looked at what was on those 3 pages and I made a decision that was not about anger. It was about accuracy. I decided that starting the next morning, I was going to operate within my family from an accurate understanding of my position rather than a hopeful one. This did not mean I was going to be cold or unkind. It meant I was going to stop doing things that cost me significantly and that nobody acknowledged or appreciated because those actions were not creating closeness. They were creating a dynamic where my generosity was treated as a given and my presence was treated as an afterthought. I was going to stop funding that dynamic with my end money and my own emotional resources. I was going to let reality settle into the space where my automatic help had been, and I was going to see what my family actually did with that space. The next morning, Priya called. I answered because I believe in conversations. She said, "Hey, sorry you had to leave early. You missed the cake. It was really good." I said, "I am sure it was." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am fine." She said, "You seem a little quiet." I said, "Priya, there was no seat for me at your engagement dinner." There was a pause. Then she said, "I know, and Mom said she was going to figure something out. I thought you were okay with sitting at the bar for a bit." I said I did not know I was supposed to sit at the bar. She said, "Well, we had the room at capacity." I said, "2 of your coworkers were in that room." She said, "They are my really close friends, Nadia." I said, "I am your sister." There was another pause. Then she said, "I did not think it would be a big deal to you. You are not usually bothered by that kind of thing." That sentence is the one that I have come back to more than any other in the months since that night. You are not usually bothered by that kind of thing. She was not wrong, technically. I had spent years not being bothered by things that should have bothered me. I had made the choice so many times to swallow the slight, absorb the oversight, and show up the next time with a full tank anyway. I had done it so consistently and so quietly that my sister had built a genuine belief that I did not notice or feel these things. She had not built that belief to be cruel. She had built it because I had supplied the evidence for it every single time I chose peace over honesty. That morning, I understood that my silence had been a kind of dishonesty, not toward them, toward myself. I said to Priya very calmly, "I am bothered by this one." She said, "Okay," and then after a moment, "Are you going to be weird about it at Christmas?" I said, "I do not plan to be weird about anything." I said, "I want you to have a wonderful engagement." I said, "Congratulations sincerely." And then I said, "I am going to be a little less available for a while because I have some things I need to sort out for myself." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means what it sounds like." I said, "I will talk to you soon," and I ended the call. That conversation was the first honest thing I had said to my sister in years. It did not feel good in the moment. It felt like stepping off a familiar path into grass you could not see the bottom of, but it also felt, for the first time in a long time, like something true. 2 days later, my mother called. She opened with asking how I was, which she does when she is trying to determine the temperature of a situation before she decides how to approach it. I said I was well. She said, "Priya mentioned you were upset about the dinner." I said I was not upset, I was surprised. She said sometimes logistics get complicated with these big gatherings. I said it was 11 people including Caleb's family. She went quiet. I said, "Mom, I was not in the head count for my sister's engagement dinner." She said, "Nadia, you know how these things go. It was not intentional." I said, "I know it was not intentional." I said, "That is actually the part I have been thinking about." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean that not being included was not a decision you made consciously. It just did not occur to anyone to make sure I had a seat. And I have been thinking about what that says about how I fit into things." She was quiet again, then she said, "You are always such a part of this family." I said, "I know, I am the part that handles things. I would like to also be the part that gets invited properly." She made a sound that was halfway between a sigh and a laugh, the sound she makes when she feels criticized and wants to reframe it as me being sensitive. She said, "I will make it up to you at the bridal shower planning." I said, "Okay." I said, "I appreciate that," and I ended the call. I want to be very clear about what I did and did not do in those 2 phone calls. I did not scream. I did not send long paragraphs about everything that had ever hurt me. I did not list the money. I did not issue ultimatums. I simply stated what had happened, told the truth about how I was thinking about it, and listened to what they said in response. What they said in response told me more than any argument ever could have. Priya's first instinct was to check whether I was going to be inconvenient at Christmas. My mother's first instinct was to tell me how helpful I had always been as a way to soften the evidence that I had also always been overlooked. Neither of them said I am sorry that happened. Neither of them said you should have had a seat and I failed to make sure you did. They managed the situation. They did not address the truth of it. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface. I went about my work. I had 3 new bookkeeping clients that autumn and I delve myself into those accounts with the focus that I always bring when I need my brain to have somewhere useful to go. I did not call Priya to check in the way I usually did. I did not offer to help with any of the early wedding planning conversations I knew were happening in a separate chat that I was not part of. I did not send money for anything. I did not volunteer. I showed up to a family dinner at my mother's house in early November because I believe in showing up. But I showed up as a guest, not as a workhorse. I ate the food. I helped clear 1 round of dishes. I did not offer to stay and wash everything afterward the way I usually did. I left at a reasonable time and I drove home and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like a person who had spent an evening somewhere rather than a person who had serviced an evening somewhere. Rosie called me a week after that dinner. Rosie calling me directly was unusual. She usually communicated through my mother or through group messages. The fact that she was calling me directly meant something was needed. She opened warmly, asking about my work, and then after about 4 minutes she said, Nadia, I am going to be straight with you because you know I always have been. I said, okay. She said, Priya is feeling a little distance from you and it is making your mother anxious. I said, I understand. She said, you know how Priya gets when things feel off? It affects her focus and right now she needs everyone around her to be steady because the wedding planning is a lot. I sat with that for a moment. The message was clear. Priya was feeling distance from me. This was a problem. The solution, implied and unspoken, was for me to close the distance, to return to being the dependable one, to stop being quiet and start being present in the way that made everyone else's life more comfortable. I said to Rosie, I am not trying to make things difficult. I said I have just been focusing on my own things lately. Rosie said we all have things, Nadia, but family has to come first sometimes. I said I agree. I also said there are times when family should make sure the people they are asking to put family first have actually been treated like family. Rosie was quiet. Then she said, well, I think you took the dinner thing a bit hard. Honestly, these things happen. I said they do. I said, but they are happening to me specifically in a pattern that I have been noticing for a while, and I am not in a place to pretend I have not noticed. She said, you sound angry. I said, I am not angry. I am clear. There is a difference. She said, well, I hope you will think about Priya. I said, I think about Priya quite a bit. I said, I hope everyone thinks about me occasionally too. And I said, thank you for calling, Rosie, and I meant it, because at least she had called directly rather than sending a message through someone else. After I got off the phone with Rosie, I did something I had been putting off for several months. I contacted my accountant, a woman named Sylvia who had been filing my taxes for 5 years and who I trusted completely. I had been thinking about something. The previous year, my grandmother on my mother's side had passed away and left a property, a small house in a neighboring town that had been in the family for decades. The will had designated the property to be shared equally between my mother and my Aunt Rosie. At the time, my mother had mentioned that the plan was to eventually sell the house and split the proceeds, and that the money would likely go toward helping both my sister and me with our futures, which was the kind of vague family promise that sounds meaningful and means nothing unless it is written anywhere. I had not asked for anything to be written anywhere because I had been operating from the hopeful belief that my family would naturally do right by me. I called Sylvia and I said I want to understand what my financial situation actually looks like, including any informal family promises that have been made to me. Sylvia was thorough and professional and not sentimental about any of it. She helped me see that I had no legal claim to anything from my grandmother's estate because my name was on no document. She helped me understand that $9,800 in informal cash support provided to a family member with no written agreement had no legal recovery path. She helped me see that I had been operating financially as if loyalty created legal standing, and it does not. What loyalty creates is emotional debt, and emotional debt is paid back on someone else's schedule or not at all. I left that meeting with Sylvia feeling the particular kind of clarity that only comes after you have forced yourself to look at something true. The clarity was not comfortable, but it was mine. I went home and I updated my own budget. I stopped allocating the informal family support line that I had quietly built into my monthly expenses, the money I kept loosely available in case Priya needed something or my mother had an unexpected cost that I would be asked to quietly absorb. I put that money into a separate savings account that I labeled with my own name. It was the first time in 4 years that I had saved money that was genuinely only for me. November turned to December. The wedding planning was clearly gaining momentum. Priya was getting married the following September and the timeline of decisions was accelerating. I knew this not because anyone was keeping me updated, but because I could see the edges of it in the group chat activity, in the tone of my mother's messages, in the way Rosie suddenly started talking about venues and caterers in the family group, as if I were a bystander receiving news rather than a family member being consulted. I noticed all of it, I said nothing about it. I continued to do my work. I continued to show up to family events when invited. I continued to be polite, warm, and present in ways that were real. I just stopped doing the invisible extra labor, the behind the scenes financial cushioning, the proactive help that nobody asked for and nobody thanked me for because they had come to believe it simply appeared. In mid December, something happened that I had not anticipated. My mother called me and her voice had a different quality than usual. It was the voice she uses when something has gone wrong and she needs help but does not want to lead with that because leading with it would require acknowledging that she needs something. She said, Nadia, I need to talk to you about the house. I said, grandmother's house? She said, yes. She said, there has been a complication with the sale. I said, what kind of complication? She said the buyer they had been working with had fallen through at the last minute because of a financing issue on the buyer's side. She said that normally would just mean finding a new buyer, but that the cost of carrying the property taxes, the basic maintenance, and a pest inspection that had turned up some issues, was adding up and that Rosie was having cash flow problems and had asked my mother to cover Rosie's share of these holding costs, and my mother did not have the liquid cash available to do that without impacting her own household budget. My mother said it very carefully and very gently, and with a lot of framing about how this was just temporary, and how the house was still worth a good amount, and how once it sold, everything would work out. But what she was moving toward, what the entire architecture of the phone call was building toward, was a request. She wanted to know if I could help cover some of the property costs, just temporarily, just until the sale went through, and she said she would, of course, make sure I was compensated from the proceeds. I sat with this for a long moment before I responded, not because I did not know what to say, but because I wanted to say it correctly. I said, Mom, I have to be honest with you. I said I have spent the last 4 years quietly helping with costs for Priya and for household things, and I have done it without asking for anything back because I wanted to be helpful and because I believed in what we were building as a family. I said I did not have a seat at Priya's engagement dinner. I said when I mentioned it, the response was that these things happen and that I should think about not being weird at Christmas. I said I have been doing a lot of thinking about what I am willing to put in and what I am getting back, and right now I am not in a position to extend informal financial help for a property I have no stake in. She was quiet. I said I love you and I want good things for this family, but I cannot keep being the financial cushion without being treated like I belong. There was a long silence. Then my mother said, Nadia, I did not realize you felt this way. I said I have been feeling this way for a while. I said I tried to say something after the dinner and I do not think it landed. She said you should have told me more clearly. I said I did tell you clearly. I said I told you I wanted to be included as family and not just as the one who handles things. She was quiet again, then she said, what do you want me to do? I said right now, I just want you to hear me. I said I do not need you to fix anything tonight. I just need to stop pretending everything is fine when it is not. She said, okay. She said, I hear you. And I think she did hear me, though hearing someone and acting on what you hear are two different things. In January, I got a message from Priya that was different in tone from anything she had sent in months. It was not the breezy hey you energy of before. It was more careful and a little raw, and she said, Nadia, Mom told me what you said to her. She said I did not know you felt invisible. She said she had thought about the dinner and she realized it was a real problem and not just a logistical thing. She said she was sorry. I read the message twice. Then I called her back. CK instead of texting because tone matters, and because I did not want this conversation to happen in a medium where things could be misread. I said, thank you for saying that. I said, I mean it. She said, I did not realize how much you have put in for me. She said she had talked to Caleb about it, and he was also the one who suggested she say something. I noticed that. I noticed that it took a man she had known for 2 years to prompt her to acknowledge what her sister of 31 years had done for her. I did not say that out loud. I filed it in the same notebook, the mental one, where I keep the things I see clearly. I said, I am glad you reached out. She said she wanted me to be properly involved in the wedding. She said she was going to talk to her planner about making sure I had a real role. I said I would appreciate that very much, and I meant it. But here is what I had learned by January. Appreciation expressed in a phone call is a beginning, not an arrival. I had heard many kinds of appreciation across the years. I had been told I was the steady one, the reliable one, the one the family counted on. Appreciation that leads to nothing changing is just another way of keeping things exactly as they are. I was grateful for the call. I was not going to immediately return to being the same person I had been before the dinner. I was going to watch and see whether the appreciation was followed by anything real. February brought something I had not seen coming. One of my bookkeeping clients, a small restaurant group owned by a woman named Alina, had been talking to me for a few months about expanding her business and possibly bringing me on as a part-time finance director rather than a contractor. In February, she made it official with a real offer, part-time hours, a retainer, and a profit-sharing arrangement tied to the expansion. It was not a massive amount of money, but it was stable, it was respected. It was a promotion in every real sense of the word, and it meant that for the first time I was being invited into something as a valued partner rather than a reliable service. I accepted the offer. I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in a long time, which was the feeling of being chosen, genuinely chosen for who I was and what I could do. I told my family about the promotion at a Sunday dinner in late February. My mother said, "That is wonderful, Nadia, very good news." Priya said, "Oh wow, so you will be like a real executive soon?" Rosie said she had always known I was smart. And then the conversation moved on within about 4 minutes to Priya's venue decision, which had apparently been narrowed to two options and which required an extensive family discussion about the pros and cons of each. I ate my food. I listened. I did not feel crushed by the pivot the way I once might have. I just noticed it. You could say it was a small thing, but it was not to me. My 4 minutes of achievement was useful only as a bridge back to what everyone really wanted to talk about. March arrived. Priya's bridal shower was being planned for May. My mother had told me in January that she wanted me to be involved. By the time March came, a planning group chat had been formed that included Priya's two friends from the office, Caleb's cousin and Rosie. I was not in that chat. I found out about it when Rosie mentioned something from it in the main family group by accident and then immediately said never mind, it was a planning surprise thing. I did not say anything in the group. I took a screenshot of the exchange. I added it to the notebook. 2 weeks after that, Priya called to ask if I could help cover half the cost of the bridal shower venue. She said the planning group had found a lovely garden space for the event, but the rental was more than they had budgeted and they were trying to distribute the cost among people who cared about making it special. She said she knew I would want to contribute. I said how much? She said $1,400 would be my half. I said $1,400 is my half of what total? She said 2,800 for the venue. I said, am I in the planning group? She paused. She said, well, it was mostly a coordination thing. You know how you get busy. I said, so I am not involved in the planning, but I am being asked to fund half the venue. She said, I did not think you would mind. You have always been so generous. And there it was. The architecture of the old dynamic, rebuilt in 3 months from the January phone call where she had apologized and said everything would be different. I said, Priya, I am not going to contribute to a venue for an event I am not involved in planning for a reason that seems to be that it was easier to keep me out of the chat than to include me. She said that is not what happened. I said I have a screenshot of Rosie mentioning the planning chat by accident and then walking it back. She went very quiet. I said I am not angry about this. I said I am conceased. I said in January I told you I needed to be treated like I belonged, not just like someone who provides things. I said this is the first test of whether that conversation meant anything, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said I will talk to the group and add you to the chat. I said I appreciate that. I said once I am properly included I am very happy to discuss what kind of contribution makes sense. She said okay, and we ended the call. She added me to the planning chat 2 days later. The welcome message was brief and slightly stiff. I sent a warm response and offered 3 specific ideas for the shower that were thoughtful and within the existing vision they had laid out. 2 of my ideas made it into the final plan. Nobody announced that the ideas came from me, but that was fine. I was not looking for credit, I was looking for a seat. April was relatively quiet. I focused on my work with Alina's restaurant group. The expansion was moving forward and my involvement was deepening in ways that felt good. I had started keeping much more precise records of my own financial picture, my savings, my professional growth, my goals for the next 3 years. I had written a list of the things I was no longer willing to do, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I was no longer willing to give money informally without acknowledgement. I was no longer willing to be the last one notified of things I should be first to know. I was no longer willing to treat my own presence in my family as something I needed to earn every time. These were not demands I made publicly. They were boundaries I held privately. The strength of a private boundary is that nobody can argue with it, they can only encounter it. In May, the bridal shower happened. It was at the garden venue. I was there early, I helped set up. I had brought a small handmade book I had put together with photos of Priya and me from the last decade, with a short caption on each page that I had written from memory, moments I had not forgotten even though I was not sure she remembered all of them. It took me 3 evenings to make. She opened it in front of everyone and she cried, real tears. She held it against her chest and she looked at me across the table and she said, Nadia, this is the most beautiful thing. And I believed her. I believed the emotion was genuine. I believed she loved me in her way, in the incomplete and self-absorbed and often careless way that people love you when they have been allowed to love you on their own terms for too long. I smiled at her. I said, you're my sister. That was all I needed to say. But privately, I kept my eyes open. Because caring for someone and pretending they have changed when they have not changed are two different things, and I was no longer willing to do the second one. June arrived. My mother called me about the property again. The pest issues had been addressed and there was a new buyer and the sale was expected to close in August. She said she wanted to sit down with me to talk about the future before things got busy with the wedding. I said I would like that too. We set a date for the following weekend. I want to say that I went into that conversation with hope, genuine hope. Not the blind hope I used to carry, the hope that if I kept being good eventually the balance would correct itself, but the careful, clear-eyed hope of someone who has set a standard and is watching to see whether it will be met. We sat at my mother's kitchen table on a Saturday morning with coffee. She had made the almond cake that she makes when she wants an occasion to feel meaningful. I appreciated the effort. She said, Nadia, I have been thinking a lot about things. I said, I have too. She said she knew the last year had not been easy and that some things had been handled poorly and that she wanted to do better. I listened. She said she wanted me to know that when the house sold, she was intending to set aside a meaningful amount for me to acknowledge my years of quiet contribution and that she and Rosie had talked about it and agreed. I said, what does meaningful mean specifically? She paused. She said they had not put an exact number on it yet. I said, Mom, I think we should put a number on it. Not because I do not trust you, but because specific things are real things and vague things have a way of becoming smaller than they started once other expenses come up. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. She said that was fair. We talked for 2 hours. By the end of the conversation, we had agreed on a number, and my mother had said she would have it documented in writing as a commitment letter from her to me, which my accountant Sylvia could review. I did not ask for a lawyer. I did not threaten anyone. I just asked for something in writing. That is a reasonable thing to ask for. It is what anyone would ask for if they had spent enough time watching informal promises dissolve into nothing. July was the month when the second wave of pressure hit. Priya's wedding was 2 months away and the financial reality of it was becoming visible. Caleb's family was contributing a fixed amount. My mother had budgeted a certain amount from her savings. But the wedding Priya had designed in her mind cost more than the amounts that had been committed. Priya came to me in mid-July with a request. She said she knew it was a lot to ask. She said she had been thinking about how much I had always done for her. She said she wanted to ask if I could contribute to the wedding fund, specifically to close a gap in the photography cost, because the photographer she wanted was $1,700 over budget. She said she would pay me back from the gift money after the wedding. I looked at my sister. I thought about the green dress. I thought about the bar stool. I thought about the planning chat I was not in. I thought about the $1,400 for the venue. I thought about the $9,800 in rent. I thought about January's apology and May's birthday book and what it means when someone loves you but keeps coming back to the same well. I said, Priya, I am going to say something and I need you to hear it the way it is meant, which is not as an attack. She said, okay. I said, I care about your wedding. I want it to be beautiful, and I am not able to make another informal financial contribution that I will need to emotionally negotiate or track or eventually let go of. I said, if you need me to help in a way that uses what I am actually good at, I will help you build a real wedding budget right now today and figure out where adjustments can be made without needing more money from people who have already given what they have. She stared at me. I said, I am a bookkeeper. This is what I do. Let me actually do it for you. She said after a long pause, okay. We spent 4 hours that afternoon going through her wedding budget line by line. I found $1,100 in adjustments that did not require compromising anything she actually loved about the plan. I helped her have a direct conversation with the caterer about a small menu simplification that saved her $600 more. I found a photographer referral through one of my clients who was equally skilled and within budget. By the end of the afternoon, the gap was closed. Priya did not need anyone's extra money. She needed someone to look at the numbers clearly. She looked at me when we finished and she said, why did I not ask you to do this months ago? I said, because you were used to asking me for money, not for skills. She was quiet. Then she said that was a fair thing to say. I said, I know. And I said, now you know what else I can do. August came, the property sold, my mother's commitment letter arrived, reviewed by Sylvia, and the amount was real and documented. I received my portion in a bank transfer the week after closing. I sat with that money for a day before I did anything with it. I did not celebrate. I did not feel like celebrating was the right response. I felt something closer to recognition. The recognition that sometimes the world does eventually balance, not because people are suddenly fair, but because you finally stop letting them use your silence as permission. September was Priya's wedding. It was a Saturday, late afternoon, golden light through the windows of the venue, flowers Priya had agonized over for 6 months arranged exactly the way she had wanted them. I was there. I was a bridesmaid. I had been asked properly with a genuine conversation and enough lead time to find a dress I actually liked. I stood beside my sister in front of a room full of people and I watched her marry a man who seemed to love her genuinely. I cried real tears, the kind you cannot manufacture, because she is my sister, because I love her in the real way, the complicated, surviving way that love looks when it has been tested and decided to stay. At the reception dinner, I sat at the family table. My name was on a card. My chair was waiting for me. I sat down in it and I put my bag under my chair and I looked around the room and I felt something settle inside me that had been unsettled for a long time. My mother sat beside me. She touched my hand briefly. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I looked at her and I knew that she was not a simple person and that loving her was not a simple thing and that the last year had taught both of us something, even if what it taught us was different for each of us. I squeezed her hand once and let go. Rosie gave a toast that was, if I am honest, mostly about Rosie. I smiled through it. Some things do not change. But you can know that something will not change and still decide to be present for it with your whole heart because the people around you are real people, real and flawed in yours, even when they drive you to a bar stool in a green dress. You do not have to choose between clear eyes and an open heart. TH. That is the thing I spent 31 years trying to figure out, and the thing I finally did. After dinner, Priya found me at the edge of the dance floor. She was glowing the way a person glows when everything they planned has come true. She put her arms around me and she said, I am glad you are here. I said, I am glad I am here too. She said, for real this time? I laughed. I said, yes, Priya, for real this time. She pulled back and looked at me. She said, I want to do better. I said, I know. I said, I do too. She said, no, you do not. You are already pretty good. I laughed again. I said, I am working on it. She said, Nadia, you are the most dependable person I have ever known. I said, I know. I said, I am working on being the most valued one too. She looked at me for a moment and then she said, yeah, I think we can make that happen. I said, I think so too. I walked home that night, not home to my parents, home to my own apartment, my own table, my own tea, my own savings account labeled with my name. I sat in the quiet for a while. I thought about everything the year had held, the bar stool and the green dress, the phone calls and the notebook, the $1,400 I did not pay and the 4 hours that saved $1,700, the commitment letter and the bank transfer, the planning chat I was eventually added to, the bridal shower book that made my sister cry, the seat at the reception with my name on the card. None of it was a fairy tale, none of it wrapped up perfectly. My family is still my family, which means they are still learning things I already know and still teaching me things I have not figured out yet. Rosie still talks mostly about Rosie. My mother still moves toward the vague and away from the specific unless I push gently. Priya still has the instinct to lean on me in the ways that are easiest for her, but there is something different now. Something that did not exist before the dinner at Vera in that deep green dress. There is a version of me that they have now seen, the version that says clearly what she needs, that does not fund things she is excluded from, that offers skills instead of money, that writes down what she sees, that asks for things in writing, that holds a private boundary without announcing it. They have seen that version now, and you cannot unsee a thing like that. The woman who sat at the bar that night knew something important. She knew that leaving the table even when no one gave you a chair does not mean you have lost. Sometimes leaving the table is the most powerful thing you can do because it is the first moment you have ever truly chosen yourself. And what you discover when you start choosing yourself consistently, carefully, with love and without apology is that the world eventually makes room. Not always perfectly, not always on your timeline. But eventually the room appears. I am Nadia. I sat at the bar and then I went home. And then I built something better. That is the whole story. That is the only story that matters. I want to ask you something before you go. There was a moment in this story sitting at that bar in the green dress with my phone open to $11,000 of invisible giving where Nadia had two choices. She could go back inside and smile and pretend the seat did not matter, or she could sit with the truth and let it change her. If you have ever been the one who shows up, the one who covers things quietly, the one who never asks for much and gets noticed even less, I want to know about it. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you finally decided that being needed was not enough, that you needed to be valued too. Your story matters, and so do you.